Welcome to this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have with us Tim Lindsay. He's the CEO and founder of Tellwell Publishing. And since the launching of the company in 2015, Tim and his team have helped over 6,000 authors, as they say, independently publish their books. And he's also the author of his new book, The Call to Authorship: How and Why to Write, Publish, and Promote a Nonfiction Book. So we'll learn from him how you can answer your own call to authorship and finally publish the book that's been waiting inside you. Welcome to the show, Tim.
Thanks for having me, Ajay. Pleasure to be here.
You're welcome. Welcome to the show, Tim. Welcome to India in this online form. And I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people, a lot of potential authors across the world will benefit from what we are going to talk right now. We'll talk about authorship, we'll talk about writing, publishing, becoming an author. We'll talk about all this, but before that, let's talk a bit about your journey, your background, so that the audience knows whom they are listening to.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I was always interested in writing and loved being around books growing up. And then I went to university and thought I would go into writing. But it's funny, in first year writing class, the final assignment was doing a book review. And it was a book review of this book called On Writing Well by William Zinsser. It's actually a classic, and it was a great book. It was really motivating. It inspired me to write with humanity and simplicity. But I had to write the book review, but I started thinking of George Orwell's essay that he wrote called Why I Write. And in that essay, he talks about what motivated him to write. And of course, for him, he had a mission. He was writing to try to prevent totalitarianism and Stalinist Russia style. And I just realized as a 18-year-old, I really had no purpose for writing, and I really didn't know anything. And so I dropped out of writing. But I ended up getting years later managing the campus newspaper, and that threw me back into writing. But then once that was done, the economy was so bad in 2009 and 10 that I couldn't get not only a job in publishing, I couldn't really find a job anywhere. So I had to go at self-employment. I tried being a publishing consultant, helping small upstart publications. And, it was a first go at entrepreneurship. And so I failed in one sense, but, I learned many lessons through scars. And I ended up taking a full-time job working in publishing for several years. And at that time, the traditional industry was in decline and the self-publishing world was really expanding. So that's really where I worked in a company guiding authors through the self-publishing process, and in a sense, representing the value of editors and designers for people who wanted to self-publish but wanted help doing it. And that ultimately led to me, after a few years, quitting and then eventually writing my own book about publishing. And that launched me into starting my own business. And fast forward 10 years and 6,000 authors, we've learned a lot about the psyche of why people publish and the different types of motivation. And now I'm finally putting that and practicing what we preach a little bit by the book I just did release this past year. So that's a bit of the backstory. And it's been inspiring seeing the different types of authors and what motivates them, and digging into some of the myths in the industry. So feel free to ask any question, and happy to go where you want to go with your questions.
Absolutely, absolutely. We will certainly come to that. First, to understand about your work itself. What is it that you are trying to tell with what you are doing, as well as with what you are saying and with what you are writing? What is your message here to the different audiences that you have got with what you are doing?
Yeah, well, I think my message, it in one sense, I want to reflect what we've learned from working with the authors we've worked with. And we've worked with people writing their memoirs, in some cases just for family or for local history. We've worked with people who are doing it for writing a fiction book as a hobby on the side. And then we've worked with authors who are trying to build a business and they're trying to get into public speaking and maybe coaching, and they're using a book strategically. And we've worked with some famous people, like the most valuable player in the NFL football, who actually put out a kids book trying to inspire people. But when we work with authors, we often do a survey and we ask them a whole bunch of questions about what motivated them to publish and why they chose to self-publish and so on. And when we dig through their responses, I mean, it's a gold mine. It's really inspiring, honestly. And but it comes down to three streams of people. Some people write as an act of service. In fact, many authors, almost all of our authors, in some respect, because if it's worth publishing, you're trying to have an audience and willingly so. But being of service can be inspiring or empowering with knowledge. Some cases people have gone through a sickness or a life challenge, and they're sharing their story in an effort to help others, or they've you know gone through some form of trials and tribulations. So service is a big motivator, the act of giving. Another one is the strategic why, which is people using a book to build a platform, to gain credibility, to leverage it for speaking, for media, and so on, or tying it to other revenue streams. And that's a big thing in the world of publishing nowadays. It's very hard to stand out. Most books don't sell more than a couple hundred copies would in some senses be a success. So making money from publishing a book is very difficult. But people who do, it's usually when they're using a book together with coaching or courses or community or consulting and services and so on. And then that's where it can make sense from a business why. But again, the business isn't the only motivation. Royalties aren't the only motivation. There's the service, there's that strategic why, but then there's also people who are intrinsically motivated. They're doing it as an act of creativity, of expression, of a better use of their time than wasting it on social media, or and a better use of their money from things that they could be wasting it on. Um, so that's part of what I'm doing, is reflecting what not everybody understands about the motivations for publish. The other piece then is just the how, because so many people, they get stuck. They're not sure if they should publish or what or why they are. And I really want to. That's the first step in my 10-step method, is getting clear on your why and unpacking it and knowing what's possible with a book. But then beyond that, how do you plan a book and then go write it, publish it, and promote it? Most people get stuck before they ever finish a first draft. So my mission is to remove barriers to publishing, starting with what's in people's head and getting clear with what's motivating them, and then making it more clear and simple what the steps are to get a book done, through the first draft, which is the worst draft, of course, through design, and doing it in a way that's quite fun. And honestly, the very act of planning your book, I created this one-page plan I call a call to authorship plan. But when you actually like put a fake title on your book, or a working title, we call it, and you start to craft your outline and maybe mock up what your cover will look like, maybe even get a designer to print off your cover to put it around somebody else's book. That's what I did, where I printed a cover, put it around somebody else's book, and just to help inspire myself. And then, of course, trying to get in that writing habit to move through it. So the mission is reflecting the different whys that people write, and then really helping get through the how of publishing a book.
Absolutely, absolutely, Tim. Let me understand it for the audience this way. And with due respect to all the, all the efforts that a lot of these authors are making, it seems almost everyone is writing. And so my question is, who is reading? As you yourself said, many of these books sell not beyond 100 copies. So either they have bought it for, themselves, around their relatives, or a few friends here and there. Help us understand then, is it really a story there for them, or is it the industry which is telling them, which has come up around this so-called self-publishing, that is telling them that you have got a story and you got to publish it? Help us understand in that backdrop, so that the real authors are reflected, and not just any idea is a story. It is, but not in the sense that it is valuable for readers, and they get confused.
Hmm. Yeah. So it's not easy to, when you think about what it means to buy a book. Okay, it costs whatever it costs to buy a book, not necessarily a huge barrier. But then to invest hours and hours and hours and days and days and days to read a book, that's a pretty big commitment, right? If you're talking
Right.
about, just getting 15 minutes of a person's time or an hour of a person's time is, that's not easy to do. People pay a lot of money in marketing to get that time. So um so the thing is, people are motivated to connect with other people. They're motivated to help other people. They're motivated to entertain, and they're motivated to express. So I think there's part of our humanity that is about creativity, about sharing ideas, about connecting, about making an effort to communicate and share stories and connect that way. And that's part of the motivation. But obviously, if it's not a very well done story, or it's not put together well, or you don't have a clear audience in mind, that's actually step two in my process and many other writers about how to write well. You want to know who you're writing for, and you also want to get help to make the quality of your product better, so it resonates, so that people actually get value from it. But even if it's a great book, then you still have to stand out. You have to promote it. So some people, if they have affect one person's life, then that can be enough. So for example, one of the first authors I worked with was writing a children's book about a duck that was losing its feathers, a mother duck that was losing its feathers. And the guy who was writing it, his wife had breast cancer and was going through treatment, and she was losing her hair, and they had two children. And so he was trying to explain what was going on with their mother losing her hair, getting cancer treatment. So he did it through an allegory of a duck losing its feather. And in one sense, how do you measure the impact of that on his two children, who were, let's say, the primary audience? That's it's not the scale of the impact in terms of the number of people, it's the quality of the impact. And that's the case for many people. But of course, then he didn't just want to share it with his children. He thought, well, what other books are there for children whose mothers are going through cancer treatment? And so that was his target audience. And it's a niche one, but he was, driven by a very personal experience, and then, somewhat with a mission to, if he could, help other people in a similar situation. And it might not be a huge audience, but with, say, he sells 200 copies of that, and it's 200 children whose parents are going through that sort of crisis. So that's something that could motivate them. So that's one perspective. Some people are very motivated by the impact they could have on a single person. Some teachers are motivated that way. Their students are coming and going, and they feel like they're putting their passion into it, but they feel if they can really change one student's life in a major way, then it's worth it. And what else can I say? I guess one other thing I would say is, what else could you use your time? What would be a better use of your time? And the reality is, I actually use this term. I don't know if you've been in media. There's this term in the media space called remnant advertising, and it's basically, in old school publishing or radio, they would try to sell advertising with the space, and if there's extra space they didn't sell, they would kind of just auction it off to the highest bidder, and it was lower cost, but it was called remnant. It's kind of like leftover advertising space. I sort of see in our lives, we often have part of our life that's busy doing important things, having a job, making some money, eating, sleeping. But then most of us have wasted time, and some of that wasted time might be scrolling on media and, living in our bubble and maybe getting angry or what have it. And often there's wasted time, and redirecting that into a longer term project. And books, kind of by definition, are harder than a post. They're harder than a tweet, a social media post. They're harder than a blog. If you're going to write a book, it's coming from inside of you somewhere, and it's going to take a bit of work. What's difficult about it is also what makes it meaningful. So I think in some sense you can compare it to, is it a better use of your time to be creative, to try to plan a project, to pursue a passion. And of course, that begs the question, if you're going to write a book at some point in your life, which book is it going to be? And often people do one and then they realize, oh, you know what, I'm going to do another. So it depends how you're looking. I sense the sort of, what's the point of doing it if it's only 200 people? In some cases, you're aiming higher, but I think it's just important to know that it's a tough to stand out. It's not easy. So, and that is why, in my book, I do try to say, well, if you're really trying to make money with a book, okay, traditional publisher looking for somebody who already has a big platform. How do you get a big platform? Well, that takes many, many years of building it. But alternatively, you can use a book strategically to build a platform, to combine it with speaking, with content, um, with multiple revenue streams through coaching and courses and so on. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I tried to angle it from a few different perspectives. And again, sometimes people are writing as an act of catharsis or an act of healing. And of course, what you write when you're healing, or maybe if you're writing your biography, you're making sense of maybe you've just retired and you're making sense of your life, or maybe you're earlier in your life, but you have some extra time and you decide to write and you're reflecting, you're kind of trying to figure out the meaning of your story. What are the lessons you've learned? Maybe lessons that could help others. And people start in this sort of, they're doing it for the journey itself, for what the process brings to themselves as a intrinsically rewarding experience. And then later, once they refine it, they say, you know what, I think I have something here that could help other people, or that would entertain or engage or empower other people. And then it becomes, you know what, this is worth publishing. Let's see where it goes. And then some people go the next step, which is, can I use a book to help build a speaking or a consulting or a business of some sort?
Absolutely, absolutely, Tim. You have answered that very, very well indeed. Because it's not an easy thing to explain things about the meaning for others. And that is what brings me to this question about that. Before even the coming to the writing part of it, when the idea of a book either comes by yourself into your mind, or is being told by someone else, especially for people who are in the business side of things. How should they evaluate that part? Non-fiction about whatever they're learning. Should they look at the value part? Should they look at because meaning and purpose is also a big thing in today's time. Then there is the legacy part also. People want to look. How should, because in the last couple of years, especially with lots of coaches and consultants and all those people, experts and so-called experts, nothing wrong with that. They thought that their expertise will be better reflected in a book, and that different sort of industry altogether came in, where their expertise almost looked like that without the book their expertise will not stand. Help us understand from that perspective, how should a individual, a business person, founder, expert, coach, consultant really evaluate where they are reaching? Obviously it's not about then the reader. If you are trying to get more leads, then it's not about the reader, it's about you. And that is where a lot of confusion begins for the reader. Help us understand from that perspective about the evaluation part, why you are writing a book and for whom you are writing a book. Is it only about you and you are trying to put it as, is it for the world and changing the life of other people?
Hmm. Yeah. So there's a few things in there. You were partly asking if you're thinking of writing a book, should you write a book, and which book idea should you write, or what approach should you take to write it? But specifically, if you're a coach or a consultant or a business person, are you writing it just for yourself, or for strategic reasons, for leads, for promoting your business, for building your authority, your platform? And is that selfish, shall we say, or for your own purposes? And clearly it's not for others. But I would take issue with that, because I think people who, I mean, this was a journey I went through. I used to think, oh, business or marketing and sales are are bad. Business is about making money, but really businesses are also about providing a service. They're about helping people. And when it comes to writing a book to promote a business or promote a coaching practice, I do think it's a very valuable thing that a coach or a consultant can do to stand out. Now, as to whether the book is just a business card and it's just sort of like a, a fancy self-promotional material, I think it's often more than that. Just like a good business isn't just about making money, it's about providing a good service that people love and they're happy to pay for, and they feel like having paid for it, they're better off. Having paid for it, they're happy they did so, and they give good ratings for the service. In the same respect, I think even if you're doing a book to build your authority in your space, to stand out from the competition, maybe to refine your ideas into, instead of just knowing everything there is to know about marketing, to refine your ideas into a framework in a way that's easy to communicate and understand. The process of writing a book, you often fill a lot of knowledge gaps too. So when you try to take your broad expertise, narrow it into a simple framework that's unique, that's maybe like in my case, everything I know about publishing, turning it into a 10-step method and then unpacking each and making it something that helps the reader through a transformation of some sort, which is what often coaches are trying to do. Doing a book refines your knowledge. It shows your credibility externally, but it actually helps to intrinsically and internally build your credibility, because the process of putting your ideas on paper and organizing it in a better way, making it simpler to understand for the reader. And ultimately, if the book actually is helpful for the reader, then it's doing more than just being something you can kind of show in your background. And both are valuable, right? You can have a book that people don't read, or they read the first chapter and then they don't read the whole book, but it still has a positive impact on your business insofar as they realize you've written this book. So they're more likely to invite you to be a public speaker because you've gone through the effort of writing a book. It's similar to having a credential or a degree of some sort. If you've done a degree in artificial intelligence, it's probably out of date, I would say, in that case. But if you've written a book on a topic, it gives event organizers, media, bookers, podcast hosts, and so on, they can assume that you have something to say on what the entirety of your book is about. So it helps with credibility there. So I don't know. I don't think it's just about selfishness, but I call it the strategic why, or building. And just like building a business, providing a service, I think using a book to promote, to support your business is strategic, but it's really only going to be successful if it's also good for the reader and for the customer. And then that word legacy, you touched on that. And legacy, in a sense, is the sum of our impact. Legacy can be the effect of our ideas, and often we receive most of what we've learned, and then in a book is one way to pass it on. And if you're a coach or a consultant, the fees you charge might be prohibitive for most people, which is fine. You find the people who have the budget and get value from what you offer. But a book kind of, it's a way to help people who can't afford your other services. And so it contributes to your legacy. And I've seen it with successful people later in their career. They love working one-on-one or in small groups, but they start to think about maximizing their legacy, and they start thinking less one-to-one. What are the things I can do that are one-to-many? And a book can be one form. But again, let's say you sell only 200 books, but then you also do 100 media interviews and you do speaking tours. These are other ways that you're leveraging your book to have an impact, and that's about your legacy as well.
Absolutely, Tim. Absolutely. So, if one has an idea about publishing, that this particular idea will make a good book, is that enough, or there should be much more that they should know in terms of today's you know, trends of publishing, trends that the things that are happening, or sometimes, they just think the idea can be very good, and they think I can self-publish it. Is that enough, or there are other challenges that they should be aware of from the very beginning? That brings me to, you talk about the 10-step roadmap to writing and publishing a
Mhm.
book.
Yeah, so it depends. On the one hand, not every idea is a good idea. Not every book needs to be published. There was actually, when there was surveys done like 20 plus years ago, that are quoted widely. It was something like 80% of Americans felt they had a book in them, and 10% started writing, and less than 2% ever finished or published their book. And there was a cynic, a book commentator, who said 80% say they have a book in them, and that's exactly where it should stay, in them, because we don't need more in the in the traditional publishing world. It's called the schlock pile, or the slush pile, of all the rejected manuscripts. And so sure, if but here's the thing. You can look at it from different perspectives. So yes, just having an idea, you can think about what is the value of the book for your goals and in your life. And if you're writing for catharsis or for the exploration, I mean, that's your own value. So sure, in a sense, you don't care, but sometimes you don't know if you can have an audience. So the next thing I would say is there is a process of being clear on who you're writing for, and editing, improving, refining, getting, if you can afford the help from an editor to improve the quality of what you're doing. And then I would also say we're lucky that in today's day and age there's many different ways of publishing, including you can try to get a small publisher, big traditional publisher, if you can attract that, maybe a small mom and pop shop traditional publisher. And then in the self-publishing world, there's many different ways you can self-publish. You can do it yourself. So if you have no budget at all, there's still usually a path you can go. You just don't get as much sort of paid support. So in that case, then your first book might be your worst one, or in some cases it's people's best book. Their first one is their best, and then it goes downhill. But you can do it for the journey. There is steps. Many people publish their book and then they never even promote it because they don't feel comfortable or they don't know how. But you can also look at it at how much. Look at it like going to school and getting a degree. Do you make money from that? Mm, not at first. In the long run, hopefully. And a book in that sense can be a learning journey. And so just like trying to start a business, I started my first business, it failed, but I learned quite a few things, and then I tried again, and then I tried again. So if you never try anything, then you're not going to learn from your mistakes. And then, like I said, you don't have to make a huge investment. It can be a better use of your time than other ways that you can waste your time. So often most people think they have a book in them. Most people maybe want to write a book at some point. Not everybody even gets started, but if you do get started, understand your motivations and you'll learn a lot in the journey, and that alone could be worth it. But again, if you want it to be, there are steps to get better at it, and your first one's not going to be the best, but through improvement, through knowing who you're trying to help, understanding your goals, you can refine your strategy and learn with your first book. And many people who do a first book, they come back and they realize, you know what, this was fun, this was it was personally rewarding, I had an impact on some people, and they continue to do it because either as a hobby, or for the joy of it, or because they really do feel that even if their audience is small, they're making an impact, or they're using a book strategically to support a business. So there's lots of motivations to do it, but it does take time. It is hard. Uh, there are challenges, but that's part of what makes it meaningful.
Absolutely, Tim. So where or how is the best place or time for you or Telwell Publishing to get into this whole picture? Who is
Yeah.
your ideal client? Who is your ideal client here?
Well, for Tellwell, we're in assisted self-publishing for so it's people who want to self-publish, but they don't want to DIY it. They're willing to invest in their book, professional editing and design, and they also value guidance through the process, and so they have a budget for that. That's not for everybody. That's what Tellwell Publishing does, tellwellpublishing.com. But we also offer a simple guide to self-publishing, which is free, and it gives you the basics of the different types of publishing and the steps to take. With my book, Call to Authorship, I have a author website, calltoauthorship.com. And for people who are doing like a business book or they're writing either a business or nonfiction, maybe memoirs with some lessons in it, I'm currently doing a course where I guide people through the first part of the book, which is all about creating a one-page call to authorship plan, which covers your why, the who you're writing for, the what, which is the basic idea for your book, and the outline. That's a critical piece to get through writer's block. And then a rough game plan of like the timeline for when you're going to write your book and the how, the different types of publishing, pros and cons, self publishing, traditional publishing, and so on. I'm doing a simple little course. And right now, depending on when you're listening to this, that course might be free. I'm just sort of doing it as a beta trial. So guiding people through creating that one page plan. Because most people, they never get past sort of, the idea stage. And that's part of my mission is to make people go from sort of this overwhelming idea of what is publishing, how do I do it, to no, it can totally be done. Here's the steps to take. It starts with a vision, and the vision process is actually so much fun. Creating a mock cover for your book or the title of your book. I recommend writing the back cover of your book like you're selling your book, but you're really at this stage just selling the book to yourself. And I have a list of 19 book ideas, and so it's always the question, which one makes the most sense at this point in my life, or for you for this point in your life? So that's one place where I'd be happy to connect with people. Calltoauthorship.com, and there's a link to that course that I'm doing, Ajay.
Right, right, Tip. So, what are the challenges that you face in what you do, Tip?
In writing the book, I mean, the challenges for me when I was writing this book, I actually had fun getting into a habit. Once I had my outline, and Atomic Habits by James Clear is a great book on creating new habits and driving through them. For me, I was surprised by how exciting the planning stage of writing a book is when you dream up the cover and title. But a big barrier people have is in their mind. So they'll say things like, I don't have time to write a book. What I say is, you don't need time to write a book. You need time to write one page of a book again and again and again. So what I did was audit my life every day. How do I spend my time? And I was able to find that regular time where I had this rule. I had to write one word before I had my first sip of my second cup of coffee every day. The first cup was to wake me up. The second cup, I couldn't have a second cup of coffee unless I wrote at least one word. And usually I would have 15 minutes or 30 minutes or 45 minutes. I would, write 500 words. And so you don't need all the time. If you think that, I need to wait till I'm retired, I have to wait till I have weeks with no kids and no job. I am the CEO of a company with, many employees, and I have 2 children and I have a wife. And so it wasn't easy for me to find the time, but I did. Another thing people think is, I'm not knowledgeable enough. But keep in mind, when you write a book, half of what you write is often filling in the knowledge gaps. So instead of you knowing what you're going to write, sometimes you know the questions you need to ask, and you're actually filling in some of the details there. And people, what else do people think? Perfectionism and so on. So a lot of those mindset barriers stop people, and then being motivated to follow through. In my case, I had a book coach, someone I just met with every 2 weeks to track my progress. And I use a little word count tracker. So I had sort of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and I just track the word count every day. And, sometimes I'd fall off the habit and stop writing, but using a tracker and having someone to meet with for accountability every couple of weeks, that helped me get through it.
Right, right. In today's time, so much of competition, is an idea itself enough, or promotion, idea without promotion is not going to work? Or only the promotion will be enough to create, push even not so great idea.
Yeah. I sometimes say that writing a book is the writing it is the first journey. From idea to a rough manuscript is a journey. From a rough manuscript to a finished manuscript that's designed and into a published book, that's another journey. But that's the beginning of the next journey, which is how do you market the book or use the book to leverage it to market your business or other things that you develop. In some cases, people start with a book and then they add a course later afterwards. so so an idea is not enough. You do need to market it, and but that can be a whole other journey of learning, of refining your skills, right? So you launch your book, but some people are promoting their book for many years. One woman wrote a book on what is it about? It's basically about civic governance, about municipal. She was like a administrator for a town, and her book is on engaging in civic life. And 5 years later, so she used the book to be active in communities and cities and affecting the discussions around how cities are run, how do you engage the public in municipal planning and so on. 5 years later, she's updated it, but she's still using that book to show her expertise, and that's a whole other journey. And it could be that just like maybe writing your first book is tough, but it's an experience and you get through it and you learn a lot and you've published the book. It could be that now the act of marketing it, which is an end in itself. So, for example, if you start to realize, well, maybe I could become a public speaker, and what does that mean? And just like becoming an author is daunting at first, people get to marketing a book, and one way to do that is to be a public speaker, even just to do. And public speaking doesn't mean huge audiences at first. It could just be a local workshop you put up, and you get 20 people, and you share your ideas in small groups of 15 people or 20 people, and work your way up from there. Or doing media interviews the same way. So no, just an idea by itself doesn't do anything. We have everybody, not everybody, but you can be somebody who has lots of ideas, and that's a thrill in itself. But if you want to make an impact, you need to affect other people. A book, in a sense, becomes a tool, and your message is within your book for people who read it. But people who don't read it, you can share your message in many other platforms through the activities of marketing. And for people who are not wanting to do marketing, well, that's a whole other journey of exploration, and you can learn a lot, and those can be ends in themselves, and they can be extremely valuable skills, life skills, right? Once, say you publish one book and then you learn how to do public speaking and media, those become life skills, which are, as valuable as doing a degree at school. And then you can leverage those for decades and decades to come.
Absolutely. And talking of promotion, I see a lot of authors, good authors, respect people, elderly people. They have written a book, and then they are, at whatever stage of career they have, or they have been very successful, they keep on sending all this, cold emails, and so many podcasts, and people representing them also not doing it so clearly. What would you want to tell these authors? That your name is at stake, and whoever is representing you must also be considering that part of it, because the person who is doing it for you may not be impacted, but you will certainly be blacklisted in so many other places. What is your best advice to a lot of such authors who think, just, going anywhere and everywhere and buying those lists of podcast hosts or anywhere else and just writing it to them? Everyone knows that this list has been bought for $200-300 per month. This does not create a good impression at all. I'm also talking about my own experience. I've got a author's voice with KAJ. That's a specific, very dedicated show for authors. I keep on getting it. So sometimes it comes to my mind, why are such intelligent people who have achieved so much success in their careers are self-destroying their own name by getting represented by people who do not know how to diligently represent you? This is something which I often keep wondering. What would you want to say as somebody who knows about this line and also an author?
That's a good question. So, I mean, it becomes usually, hopefully, it becomes cost prohibitive, or spam filters start to work. You want to find the people who you can help the most. You also want to create the most value that you can create and find ways to communicate better. And one of those ways is actually to learn to tell your story, right? To practice telling your story, and so that you are creating value. So I don't know what the answer to your question is. You're sort of saying people are buying email lists and blasting out to a very broad audience, and it's just a lot of spam in people's spam boxes. I think there's a term called book bombing too, where people just like come up with their book and say, "I wrote this book, buy it. Here's what it's about," without having a conversation or trying to be helpful. So, yeah, I see what you're saying. It's kind of like aggressive marketing that's not targeted, and maybe it speaks to the importance when you're writing the book to know who you're writing it for, and to really dig into that profile, that individual, and really understand them. One little tip you can use is think of somebody who you actually know when you're writing the book. So you can build an avatar or like a persona for who your audience is. And of course, you can do that at the marketing stage, but ideally, you do it when you're writing the book, because that's going to help you edit the book and speak in a voice that connects with that reader. And when you really know who you're writing for, when you're writing the book, you're going to write a better book that's in the right tone. You're going to cut 50% of it that's not needed, because that, maybe that was valuable for you, but it's not going to be valuable for your reader. So for their sake, you cut it, you refine it. And then that comes back when comes time to market your book, you know how to speak to that more narrow audience, and then you're not blasting everybody who's not the right audience for your book, because there's millions and millions of other books they could read. So you want to zero in on a more targeted audience, and then practice more entertaining ways of sharing your story and your message.
Absolutely, absolutely, Tim. There is so much to learn about all this from you, and I'm sure a lot of people, a lot of would-be authors would want to connect with you, learn more about you,
Mhm.
about how you do your work at Tellwell Publishing, and also learn from your book. What's the best way for them to do so?
My author website is calltoauthorship.com. We've got that beta course on how to create your call to authorship plan. There's also a link to a guide to self-publishing and a guide to publishing on calltoauthorship.com. So lots of free information there that could be of use. And my contact details are there as well. Tim Lindsay. I'm on LinkedIn as well.
Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thanks for having me.